Hey, today I want to introduce you to my good friend, Chris Pinion. Chris Pinion, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you, Chris. I am excited, man. I love seeing the journey of your new podcast and just what you're doing to impact people's lives is really cool.
Man, I appreciate that. And I know who you are, and yet some of my friends, maybe even across the world, may not know who you are. So would you share who you are with us, Chris?
Yeah. Well, my wife and I have been married. I'm married to Linda, and actually here on July 24th, it will be 31 years that we've been married. We've got three boys and a grandson that's 3.5, and his name's Graham. And I keep telling you, Chris, when you become a grandpa, it's the best thing in the world. And then I've been a pastor for 32 years. Started the church that we're at right now called Life Quest 21 and a half years ago.
Wow.
It's been an amazing experience. And then also served as a firefighter and chaplain for a local fire department. And then, as you know, I work in real estate, running a real estate team. And then I also am the team leader for Keller Williams Legacy Partners out in Shawnee, Kansas.
That you're probably learning about my friend Chris already is that he's a people person. He believes that people are valuable because of whose image they're made in. And he has a lifelong track record of investing into the lives of others. The reason I wanted to invite Chris to be with us today is because he just wrote a new book, Quantum Leap. Check it out.
Yes.
I love the title, Change Your Thinking, Change Your Life.
Yes.
I know this isn't one of our questions that I sent over, and this is the first question, and yet talk to us a little bit about, let's start with quantum leap. Define that. Let's use the
Yeah.
same dictionary on that one.
Well, the quantum leap is a sudden change in
Mhm.
something, and so I actually learned about that phrase when you and I went to a quantum leap with Gene Rivers. Do you remember that?
Absolutely.
And
From
I
Florida.
really, that's right. And
Yep.
I remember sitting there thinking, man, that what does that mean? And then I started thinking about that. Like people need a sudden change in
Mm.
their thinking, and so yeah, so I just chose Quantum Leap. People ask me, "Oh, is it based off the movie?" I've never seen the movie or the television show. I
Right.
just
I didn't
chose
even know there
Quantum
was
Leap. I'm like,
one.
that's what we need. We need a sudden change in our thinking if we're going to be successful in life.
That's so good.
Yeah, man.
And who's this book written for?
Well, really, it's written for everyone. I mean, here's the reality, Chris. The reality is that I think almost all of us, at one point or another in life, we get stuck in our thinking, and so
Mm.
we start ruminating, and we start thinking, "I'm a failure," or "I can't do this right," or "I can't do that right," and insecurity seeps in there, and so I believe that I wrote it for everyone because I don't know of one person. I've never interacted with one human being, if they're being honest with themselves, has not struggled with their thinking and making sure that they're thinking the way that God would want them to think about themselves and about life.
So good, Chris. You and I, we meet often, and
Yes,
yet
we do.
strategically twice a year. We're overdue now. It's July, and we haven't had our mid-quarter
I was thinking about that the other day. We
check-in
need to get it on
reset.
the calendar. That's
That's
right.
okay. We'll get it on the calendar. It's not too late. And the point of me bringing that up is because in part of our meeting together strategically entering into a new year around October to reflect on the year and moving into the new year, uh, we don't just look at business, even though we're businessmen, or faith, because we look at several categories of our life. We usually start with faith, then we go to our personal, our health, right? Then we go to our family, our finances, our fun or friendships, and we have these categories that we look at. And so I know for me, there's oftentimes like I could be crushing it over here in my health and fitness, and yet I'm spending so much time working out that I'm starting to neglect my business or neglect going on date night with my wife. That sometimes something could be done at the expense of others, even though we know from our buddy Dan Grieve that we could have it all, meaning that we could be clicking on all cylinders. And yet I find, Chris, that oftentimes it's circling back and making a micro adjustment. So quantum leap, did you went Like when I hear quantum, I think big, and yet you went small with it. Is that right?
Yes. So, well, yeah, you can. I don't believe that you start out anything
Hmm.
big. You and I've talked about this a lot in life, like trying to get
Yeah.
different businesses off the ground and everything. You don't start off big. You start off small. It's one little small step. Like it's that book that we read together called Atomic Habits. Like
Mm.
it's little steps over time, incrementally, that make the difference. And so
Right.
I just think, man, like people overcomplicate it. Yet, here's what I believe, Chris. If you took the small steps that need to be made, let's just take marriage, for example, because you and I talked a lot about that. We want to be uh, men of God in our marriages, and yet there's times where we fail. And so we talk about that. Man,
Right.
I want people to realize like you can start taking little small steps that eventually are sometimes those small steps become massive. That's why I love about quantum leap is that sometimes those small steps we don't realize it, but it's a massive step. We just think of it as small. Does that make sense?
It does.
So,
Yeah.
like, example of just little things like serving our wives and opening the car door for them on a regular basis, not just when we're out on a date. Uh, that little small step can be a big thing to her because it honors her. And that's just an example. We talk about cleaning the house, or whatever. And today's my wife's birthday. And so her birthday falls on July the 4th. And it's like, man, you know what? I want to figure out how I can honor her and serve her every day of the year. And yet, especially like on her birthday, like, hey, babe, what can I do to help you and serve you? And so she's like, hey, I need help cleaning the house. Absolutely. Because
Right.
it sounds like so small, like it's not a big thing. Like sometimes I think we're looking for big things,
Hmm.
but big things happen when the little small things happen over time that build.
Yeah. It reminds me of Compound Effect by Darren Hardy.
Yeah.
It's the small things over time that compound and can make a significant difference when done consistently over time. What's the message that you really hope to get across in your book, Chris?
Chris, here's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping that like that people can realize that you can change your negative thinking.
Hmm.
So one of the chapters that I did, it was right at the very front, is confronting negative thinking and limiting beliefs. Because here's what I realized: for so much of my life, I had limiting beliefs. I had limiting beliefs about Chris Pinion. I had limiting beliefs about God. I had limiting beliefs about um, being friends with other dudes and being really vulnerable and open. And so I had to challenge those limiting beliefs. And I found out that they came from really the way I grew up. Like we all, a lot of, I mean, a lot of our thinking, if not all, has been developed over time as we've grown up. And so, what I'm hoping is that people will get the fact that they can take those negative thought patterns and they can literally retrain them. One of my favorite authors on this subject is Caroline Leaf,
Hmm.
and she's a Jesus follower, and yet she studies the mind and how the mind works. And she's written several books, Switch on Your Brain, Switch Off Your Brain. And she talks about this, the law of exposure, where it says that the mind absorbs and reflects what it is exposed to the most. And
Hmm.
so what I started learning is that most of my negative thinking was negative because I kept thinking about the negative things. Like I kept exposing myself to negative. And if you're looking for negative, here's something interesting. When you're looking for something, you find it, right? Like it's one of the laws that we've talked about. Like what you focus on expands, and that's true. Like you take a negative person, and they wake up in the morning, they go, "Hey, how you doing?" And ah, man, I'm having a bad day. Well, why are you having a bad day? Well, I don't know. I just don't like mornings. Well, you're kind of looking for it, right? Like you know you went to bed, and if I'd say, hey, what are you going to say in the morning? You'd probably say, well, I'm probably going to say I don't like mornings and it's not a good day. And so your mind kind of goes there. It's kind of like when you buy a new car, um, and you buy the car, you get home, You're like, man, this is such a special car. And then you start looking around and your reticular activator on your brain knows about your car. So you start looking around and they've got a great car. They've got a great car. They've got a blue truck. They've got a blue truck. And then all of a sudden you start seeing your same truck everywhere.
Yeah.
It's because you're looking for it because you just bought one.
Right.
So I think a lot of us, and just especially me, Chris, just in my journey
Hmm.
of realizing that I can change I can change my limiting beliefs. I can change my negative thinking. And it took time, it took counseling, it took healing. And I wouldn't say that I'm all the way there, man. Like there are days where I can fall into having that negative thinking. And at the same time, I would tell you that most of the time, probably 98% of the time, my thinking is on point and I have to work at it, but it's not negative like it used to be.
Yeah, that's
Does
a
that make
good
sense?
point, Chris. When it comes to you use the phrase limiting belief. What if somebody's never heard of that before? What does that mean?
Yeah, so to me, limiting beliefs simply means, I mean, what I do is I have people write down, hey, what are your limiting beliefs? What are the things that limit you? So, for example, like, I mean, the one that I hear all the time, well, I'm a failure.
Hmm.
Well, that's a limiting beliefs because I'm a failure. Like, failure's not a person, failure is an event.
Wow, that's
So
good.
it's like, no, you're not a failure. Quit saying I am a failure. You can say, hey, I failed at that. I tried this and I failed. But here's the cool thing. This is what I've learned. And this is so good about retraining your brain. I rarely think I fail because I learned something. So if I try something and I didn't get it in man's eyes, it might be failure. But to me, it might have been an education. And so limiting beliefs are simply those beliefs that are holding us back. And I talk to people all the time. I talk to people about doing what we've done, which is write a book. And they're like, nah, I could never do that. Well, that's a limiting belief. And here's what's interesting. If you limiting beliefs are like onions. If you start peeling back that onion on that, why don't you think you can do that? Well, I'm not a writer. How come you don't think you're a writer? Well, I was never good in English. Well, how come you were never good in English? Well, the teacher kept saying things that were nuanced to uh, that I shouldn't really take up a career in anything that has to do with English. And you just start peeling it back, and all of a sudden it's like that's the core of that limiting belief. And that's what I've had to do on a lot of things is peel that onion back and go,
Hmm.
what is the core? What is the core of why I don't believe I can do that?
That's a good get to the root of it.
Yeah. Well, I
Yeah.
mean, it happened with you and I. So when we did the triathlon, you started doing triathlons and Ironman. And I remember like the day that I looked at you at Starbucks and said, hey, I'm going to do it. And you, in typical Chris Ward fashion, you're like, okay, then. And I'm like, I started asking you
Oh.
about the bike and the different things. And I hired the coach and everything. And I was actually telling this story on another podcast recently. Actually, not a podcast. It was I was speaking to a bunch of pastors this last week internationally and on Zoom, and I was telling them how I remember like jumping into that, and I was thinking, I'm not an athlete. I'm not an athlete. I'm not an athlete. I've never been an athlete. And I remember our coach he says, Doug, Coach Doug, he
Hmm.
says to me, he goes, you got to quit thinking like that. You are an athlete. What does it take to be an athlete? Well, you do what athletes do. He goes, you're
Right.
doing what athletes do. You're riding, you're biking, you're swimming, you're exercising, and you're doing that stuff. And so I would literally, when I was swimming, and you and I've talked about this a lot, like when you're swimming, you have that time to yourself, you know,
Mm.
because you're underwater and it's quiet. And I would just say to myself over and over and over, I'm an athlete. I'm an athlete. And I would just keep saying, I'm an athlete. I'm an athlete. And and before long, I was thinking like an athlete. Like I would look at athletes and think, hey, I'm one of them. And it was kind of a crazy how that changed. And yet it changed because I started changing that limiting belief. I'm not an athlete. I can't do this.
You
Well, how do
became
you?
you reprogrammed your brain, right?
Yeah,
You were telling yourself the story, the same old story of about who you weren't, right? And if you it becomes a limiting belief, I think, if it's holding you back from who you desire to become or what you desire to have, for example.
right.
And so what I hear you saying, Chris, is that you were telling yourself one story, and I pay attention to I am statements. Whenever
Yes.
I say I am, I pay attention to what comes out of my mouth next. And I remember one time there was a guy named Paul Teller. He was coaching me. I can't remember much of any of our other coaching meetings, but there was one I'll never forget. And it wasn't even a question he asked me or anything he said. It was something that came out of my mouth. I believe words are powerful.
Yes.
Out of the overflow of my heart, my mouth's going to speak. So there's a direct connection between the words I say, the words I choose to use, and what's rolling around in Chris's heart.
Right.
And what came out of my mouth in that coaching session with Paul Teller back in 2020 or 2021 was, I am not creative. And when I said it, it just hit me. I just felt on the inside like that is a lie. And it just stood out to me where I was almost shocked by the feeling I had of once I said I'm not creative. And it's fascinating now because last year I chose the word creative or creativity to focus on as a theme for last year. Just like this year, I have my word behind me. You can't really see it because it's cut
Bold.
off, but my word this year is bold. I like to theme out the year. My point in sharing that story is like that belief. Come to find out, 2 years later, I would write a book, or 3 years later, whatever it was. So it's like actually, I'm very creative, not
Yes.
because of me and my own efforts and wisdom and whatever else, but going back to Genesis. In the beginning, God created. My belief, I believe the Bible is true, and therefore, if I'm made in God's image, if my dad's creative, so am I.
That's right.
And it's actually what's fascinating is one of the first things God revealed about himself. It wasn't his love or his judgment, or it was in the beginning, God created his creative nature. So, point being is that I wonder, as you're listening to Chris, the two Chris's today, Chris and Chris, that's fun.
Chris and Chris. That's
When you think about who you desire to be or what you desire to have, is there a story that you're telling yourself that maybe you've told yourself for years about how you're not enough, you're not
yeah.
smart enough, you're not fast enough, you're not pretty enough, you're not talented enough, you're whatever it is? I wonder if there's a story that you've been telling that's just simply not serving you well.
Happened to me. And I know I've told you this story many times because you've lived it with me. When I was 38, so I'm 51 now, I'll be 52 here July 12th, but 51 now. And at 38, I felt like my best days were behind me.
Hmm.
I don't know why 40 was so significant. So I think here's why I think it was significant. I had listened. I just connected this. I've never connected this before. I had listened to what everyone in the world had said about 40.
Hmm.
Oh, 40's over the hill. 40's this. 40. And you know what? Like I'm just connecting this right now. Like, and at 38, I felt like my best days were behind me. And my wife and I were wrestling through some marriage stuff, and I was wrestling through my identity because I really didn't know who I was. And so I began to work on myself, and just I remember within that year before I turned 40, I changed my thinking. And now here's what's crazy. You ready for this? At 51, Chris, I would tell you my best days are ahead of me.
Hmm.
Because I changed my thinking and I began to, through counseling and through friendships like yours, and David Hickenbotham, who was on last week.
Right.
Uh, it now I look at my life and go, man, my best days are ahead of me. I've got so much in the tank, and that's why I want to be as healthy as I can, spiritually, physically, emotionally, relationally, and mentally. And so, but maybe there's some people here today that are watching this, like that are like, hey, my best days are behind me. I just want to tell you, like, if you are still breathing and you're still alive, like your heart's still beating, that God isn't done with you yet. It's kind of like your book, The Path to Purpose. Like you still have a purpose
Right.
on earth. And so, really, that time of realizing, man, because I remember feeling like my best days are behind me. And at 38, if your best days are behind you and you live till 75 or 80, well, that's a long time to live. That'll be a longer time than you have lived up to that point, and you're going to live that way with those thoughts in mind. Does that make sense?
It
Like,
makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
and I think a lot of people live that way. And so what I had to begin to do is go into counseling, and you and I've talked a lot about it, like the limiting beliefs, and just going in and going, hey, my mind is a garden. One of the things I talk about in the book is your mind is a garden. Okay. So you get what you planted, you get more than you planted, and what you plant takes regular care. And so what I started realizing, you and I and another buddy, Tim, we read through the book several years ago, The Tribe of Millionaires. Remember that book?
I do.
And
Yeah.
man, The Tribe of Millionaires, like people hear it, they go, it's just about being a millionaire. Well, you got to read the book because it's really about who you hang out with.
Hmm.
And the phrase, you become like the top 5 people you hang out with. And so I started changing who I was hanging out with. I started changing who was influencing me, the conversations that I'm around, like the phrase that you and I talk about all the time. We grow into the conversations that are around us.
Right.
And man, when I started realizing my mind is a garden, like my mind, like I could be planting seeds today that are negative that can really take off, or I can plant seeds that are positive. And here's what's crazy. They have studied like, and someone can YouTube this or Google this, but they've studied where they can take the brain that it looks like negative, what it looks like negative, and when somebody starts to think positive thoughts over time, they can actually change the actual shape of the brain, like the actual physical shape of
Wow.
the brain of what it looks like on the imaging, which is interesting because I think that negative thoughts impact us more than we realize. And
Mm.
so when we
Mhm.
realize like your mind is a garden, what are you planting in your mind today? And then you get more than you planted. Like when you go out and plant seeds, if you plant 5 seeds, many times you're going to have more than 5 things come up. So we get more than we planted. And then the other principle was what you plant takes regular care. Like it just, I people think that you and I are just naturally. I hear people all say, "Hey, you and Chris Ward, you guys are just naturally positive and naturally this." But I know this from knowing you and then just knowing myself, like we have to work at it. So, yeah, we're positive. At the same time, we have to read and we have to work and we have to meet with one another and hold each other accountable to the way we're thinking, or we would slip into that negative thinking real quickly.
100%. Yeah. I couldn't agree with you more, Chris, that nothing gets better without intentionality
Mm,
and being purposeful.
yeah.
John Maxwell, I remember being in Orlando and spending some time with him and the team out there in 2016, and he had us all hold up our hand like this, which was kind of a strange thing to do. And yet, the reason he did that is because he said, everything that you want in life is uphill, meaning if it's a quality relationship with your wife, your husband, significant other, whatever, it's going to be uphill. If you want to turn
Right.
things around financially and change some things in the family tree so you're leaving things, you're passing the baton to the next generation in a way that looks different than how it was passed to you, it's going to be uphill, meaning it's going to be challenging. Like the old school folks, right? It's school was
That's right.
uphill in the snow both ways. It reminds me of the
Yeah.
law of entropy. That the law of entropy states that if anything left to itself, it moves closer and closer to chaos and destruction. Like a car sitting out in a field. What's that show? American Pickers, where they drive around and knock on people's
Yeah.
doors and stuff. Like it's like that. It's a car that looks like it's a pile of junk, but yet when it was brand new, it was pristine. What's happened? Well, it's sat there in that farmer's field year after year, And without intentionality, it starts to destruct, and it ends up in a place that um it's not a pretty sight. It's rusty, and you would just almost not even know it's a car. It looks like a pile of rusty metal. The same is true
Even
in
if
our
it's super
relationships.
nice. Yeah, even if it's
Exactly.
super
Yeah.
nice.
The point is that it's been left by itself. And so we can't, for things to get worse, all I need to do is to neglect my health, for example.
Mm,
But in order for things to change, it requires intentionality and effort and to be proactive.
yeah.
I think that's life. The same is true with our mind, right? Like you said, I love the analogy that it's a garden.
Yeah.
So I'm asking myself the question: what limiting beliefs am I having, as far as I am statements that are holding me back from my purpose? The other one is going to be realizing that my mind's a garden. What seeds am I planting? So
Yeah.
how are we intentional? Like, give me an example. How could one say somebody's buying into what we're talking about? They're like,
Okay.
okay, I'm tracking with you. Yet, how could somebody be intentional to plant seeds that are going to give a harvest that they desire?
I love that question. Well, let me give you, so a couple of years ago I stumbled upon this. I call them the sperm gauges. And I say there's the gauges in life. It's kind of like those 7 areas, and I sum them down. So sperm gauges is spiritual, physical, emotional, relational, and mental.
Okay.
So when I look at my sperm gauges, and the reason why that's kind of funny is because it helps people remember spiritual, physical, emotional, relational, mental. So the question is, how can I be more intentional? Well, so then I just look at the 5 different areas in my life. So let's just take mental, for example. How can I be how can I be intentionally mentally? Well, I can't just let my mind drift. I've got to feed my mind, right? Like I got to water my mind. So I'm going to get books. I'm going to get a book like Quantum Leap, and I'm going to say, you know what? I need to learn how to think differently. I need to learn how to think about purpose. So I'm going to get a book on purpose. I, in my library, have so many different books. I mean, I could pull out this book, which is just a cover because I'm in the process of reading it right now, called Leading at a Higher Level. Okay. By Ken Blanchard. Well, you know why I wanted to get that book? Because I want to lead at a higher level. And Ken Blanchard is a great leader, and he's also a great writer. So I'm feeding my mind. So I go, man, I really want to work on my mental. I'm going to feed my mind. One of the other ways that my counselor really helped me through, and then you and I've been through this training called Bold many, many times. What you do is you write out all of your negative thoughts. Okay. You write out the lies that you believed. On one side of a paper, just draw a line down the middle. What are the lies I believe? And then you attach a truth from God's word to that lie. And then you turn it into a declaration. So one lie that I believed was I'm not good enough, you know. So then I take a truth that, that I am bought with a price from Jesus, that he loves me, that my value comes from him. And then I turn it into a declaration. So I wake up every day and go, I am a great leader. I am the leader that my team needs
It's powerful.
to lead them forward. And it's kind of like I am an athlete. And I know it sounds crazy because you're like, well, what are you doing? But it really over time, instead of speaking the negative, and what happens, you keep speaking the truth, there's no room for the negative, right?
Right.
And so I am a great leader. I am a great friend. I am an intentional person. I used to be late a lot. And one of the things I began to work on is realizing that great leaders are not running with their hair on fire. So I just thought, you know what? I'm going to be on time, or I'm going to be there before.
Mm.
Okay. And that has really served me well. And so it just began to change the thinking. Now, here's what's funny. Years later, someone said to me, I heard them talking about me, and they were like, yeah, Chris is always on Chris time. And I challenged them. I'm like, what do you mean? And And they're like, well, like you're always late. And I'm like, you haven't met with me lately because unless there's a technological problem or whatever, I, or I'm going to be there, and I'm going to be there usually a little bit before we're supposed to meet, so I can be ready
100%. Yeah.
to
I mean,
meet.
I've known you over a decade now, Chris, and that's one of the changes that I've seen you make intentionally over the past few years, where, just as your friend, know that I have noticed that you have made that change. So good job being intentional with that.
Yeah. So to answer your question, I think that one of the best ways that we can really uh, be intentional about our thinking is I like the gauges because I go, where am I at spiritually? Where am I at physically? Where am I at emotionally? Where am I at relationally? And where am I at mentally? Chris, I'm going to tell you on the physical. I hear people say all the time when I tell them, hey, I did a triathlon, Ironman, the first thing out of their mouth, you know what they say? I could never do that.
Mm.
So here's the first thing out of my mouth right when they say that. I go, well, have you tried? Have you ever tried? No, but I could never do that. Well, why could you never do that? And they start spouting off the reasons. Well, you know what? Henry Ford is right. You get, I mean, I think it was Henry Ford, but it was someone that said, you get what you believe in your mind.
Hmm.
Like we start believing something, oh yeah, you're going to get what you deserve because you believe that about yourself. Like try it. I didn't think I could do it, and yet I did it. And that experience, I'll tell you what, that experience for me was life changing because it wasn't the finish line. It
Right.
was the process of realizing I can do hard things. And
Man.
was it hard? Yep, it was hard. And yet I can do hard things. And so I believe you got to just take each one of the areas spiritual, physical, emotional, relational, and mental and
Hmm.
go, what are statements? What are lies that I believe about myself in those areas? And what is a truth I can believe? And then just start writing declarations and start speaking those declarations. And it sounds so dumb, but instead of listening to the radio in your car, driving to work or driving wherever you're going, you just start saying these different phrases to yourself over and over and over and over and over. And you're planting seeds in your mind.
Yeah.
And eventually, all of a sudden, one day you wake up and you're thinking more positive thoughts than you were negative.
Yeah.
And all of a
Or
sudden, here's what's cool. Literally, doctors have studied this. Your blood pressure will go down. I think there's a lot of diseases that we have because of stress and because it comes from worry and you really can change the whole trajectory of your life, even physically, like in your health, if
mm.
you'll begin to do that.
In order to change the output, we have to change the input.
That's right. That's right. But it takes work. I mean, it takes hard work. I'm not going to lie to you. Like, it takes hard work, and I still have to work at it today. Like, I
Mhm.
still have to work at it today. And if I don't,
Yeah.
then I just slip back into that way of thinking.
I know what you mean. It requires intentionality.
Yeah, huge.
So you mentioned with the triathlon that it's not about the finish line, which I love because it's so true. I mean, the finish line, if anybody's ever ran a 5K or 10K or marathon or whatever the distance is, if you've ever run a race, it's amazing how quick and brief going through the finish line it is. Like it gets over in a split second,
Yeah.
and then nobody really cares, right? They'll
Yep.
send you the photo and congratulations, and yet life just moves on. It's over. And I love what you said about it. I'm reminded of it's who we become along the way. There's lessons there that we can
Yes.
learn as a result of the day after day training, getting after it. Nobody's watching, nobody's cheering, nobody knows. And when the alarm goes off or it's early in the morning or too hot, too cold, whatever, and we don't feel like it, like how do I show up in those moments when nobody's around?
Yeah,
That's the difference maker.
that is.
The reason I bring that up, Chris, is because when it comes to your book, I know from firsthand experience about the process of writing a book. Matter of fact, I'm going to get our writing coach, Cody. I got him scheduled next week.
Okay.
So he's going to be sharing with us. And yet, I wanted to ask Chris, talk to us about the process of writing a book.
I'm going to tell you about my process, okay? But my process is going to look different than your process,
Hmm.
and your process is going to look different than another author's process. So you have to be who you are. All right. So the very first thing is I'm a communicator with words, meaning communicating with my mouth. That's just the way God created me. And some people can just sit down and they can just start writing out things. Okay. That's just not me. So what I did is a couple years ago, I did a series called Quantum Leap, Change Your Thinking, Change Your Life. And it started really taking hold in people's lives. And um, and then I went to California. I spoke in California, and I just and again, this is how thinking goes. I said, you know what? I'm working on putting this into book form. And so what I did is we hired our mutual coach and editor, Cody, and we took the sermons that I had done and several others too, and transcribed them. And then we started laying it out like, okay, what makes sense for this chapter? What makes sense for the first chapter? How do we want it to flow into the second chapter, the third chapter, the fourth chapter, and so on? And then Cody would begin to help work, break it down and go, okay, I need a story here. I need this. I need that. And then I would begin to work on it. Now, that's my way. Like someone else's way might be different. But yet, here's what I want to say. If you've ever wanted to write a book, hear me, listen, you can do it. You just have to get started. And what you have to get started, what you have to get past, the very first thing you have to get past is I'm not an author,
Hmm.
right? Well, you're not going to be an author if you just sit there and say I'm not an author. You're an author of negative thinking is what you are, you know. So it's like, all right.
That's writing a story, right?
I mean, it's really no different than the triathlon. You make a
Yeah.
decision. So this is my second book. My first book was called Scars, and the process was really similar. And so that's my process. Now, someone else's process might be that they just sit down and they just start writing it out. All right, that's cool. If that's the way your brain thinks, then that's good. What I learned is there's all kinds of authors across the world, and they don't none of them do it the same way.
Good call. You have
So
to find what works for you, is what I hear you saying.
yeah,
And take
yeah,
a next step to start.
and I also just want to say, like, if you have people that are listening that want to be authors, it's just like I decided, okay, I want to run a marathon. Well, I'm going to have to get a coach and learn. And that's probably one of the biggest things that I've learned in life is that having a coach in different areas of life, and I know both you and I kind of subscribe to this model, is it's going to be hard to do it by yourself
Hmm.
because hiring a coach, paying the money, and having that accountability and that somebody to help guide you along the way or at least challenge you and encourage you, that's so important. That's so important. And so you can write a book. That's what I want to say to every one of your listeners and viewers. If you want to write a book and you've got it in you, you can write a book. And so you might need to do what my buddy Chris Ward did, which was I remember you bought a book on kind of, and you shared it with me because every time, this is a secret, every time I'm watching what Chris is doing, I go, Chris, send me the link to that. And it's not because I'm trying to be like you. And yet I know that you're doing great things and I'm doing great things. And so I want to learn from that. And
100%.
and if I can learn from that and not have to go through some pain,
Hmm.
then so you bought a book about how to write a book. And maybe that's someone's first step, or maybe their first step is to hire an editor and a coach. I don't
Yeah.
know.
You
Or
talking about
maybe,
that book by Stephen King on writing?
yes,
Yeah, that was actually a recommendation from our mutual friend David.
David Hickenbotham.
Yeah, he recommended that. That's one of the things that's standing out to me in our conversation today, Chris, is that the significance of others, having
Yes,
other people in our life. I've heard before that if I'm doing something by myself, trying to figure it out myself, I'm making it harder than it needs to be. Success
100%.
leaves clues, meaning others have lived before me. So if I'm looking to have a higher level or a more meaningful relationship with my teenage daughter, I don't need to try to reinvent the wheel and figure out how to do that necessarily. I could learn from older gentlemen that have lived before me.
Yeah.
So if I'm trying to figure it out, my concern with myself is ego getting in the way, ego eliminating God and others.
Yep.
Am I letting my ego get in the way, meaning, hey, I got this, I could figure it out, get out of my way, I got it. Versus, okay, who have I seen live this out in a way that seems like they're doing it at a higher level than I'm capable of right now? How can I buy the book, listen to the podcast, go to the event, hire the coach? How can I place myself closer to them to learn from them? So I think at its heart, we've mentioned numerous times coach, counselor, other people, even our friendships. I think to me, it feels like it's a life hack. If there's
Yeah.
an area I desire improvement in, I could seek out help. And we live in a day and age where it's not far away. Usually we're just a few clicks away or one call away.
Yeah. I think, I think the human nature is to do it by myself.
Hmm.
Yeah. I think that's why scripture says, like in Ecclesiastes chapter, I think it's 3, it says, a cord of 3 strands is not easily broken. Because if you have a cord of 3 strands, it's going to be stronger. It's going to be wrapped tighter. And I know this, I could not do it with the people. I could not do it without the people in my life, my coaches. So you and I have David Hickenbotham as a coach for marriage and parenting and just life as a man, and then writing coach and even a nutrition and a health fitness coach. And I mean, you look at the successful people in life, they all have coaches. Why? They have coaches in different areas. I mean, I was just talking about this recently. Patrick Mahomes. I mean, he's won I don't know how many Super Bowls, and he's still a young man. But somebody could say, I mean, really, the way we think is he could really say, I don't need a coach. I mean, I've already done it. Yeah, he's got coaches in different areas of his life. Why? Because he wants to continue to get better, and he knows that he would probably go backwards if he's not going forward. And so, man, the one thing I really want to challenge people on is who's in your boat? Why? The older we get, when we're kids, we have friendships and stuff, and we want to go to people's houses and hang out. But it seems like when we become adults, that we don't real we kind of almost think, oh, I'm an adult, like I don't need close friends. And I bought into that for a long time. I hear people say all the time, like, it's lonely at the top. And I hear pastors talk about, and there's a study where they talk about pastors are lonely because they don't have anybody to talk to. Well, they don't have anybody to talk to because they don't go talk to anybody. I mean, you got to build friendships with
Right.
people. And dude, I'll tell you what, man, like I feel like I'm the most blessed man in the world, not just because of my family, but I mean, you become like family, Chris, and you're one of my best friends. You know everything about me, and and we talk regularly.
Right.
And sometimes it's short, sometimes it's long. But what I appreciate about our conversations is we talk deep.
Mhm.
Like we get beyond the how's your day, how's the week, how's the weather, and who's winning in sports, and we start going deep. And I feel like our mutual accountability. Like I'll tell you I'm going to do something, and you just are really good about, hey, how's that going? Like right now, I really want to get my eating on point. And so, because I see a lot of people that it's the sperm gauges again, spiritual, physical. I see a lot of people let their physical um, gauge go. And so when I tell you that I'm really working on eating right, you don't judge me and go, well, you tried that 3 years ago and you didn't succeed. You're an idiot. No, you don't do that. You go, hey, how's that going? How's your eating? How's your protein intake? You're encouraging me. If I didn't have that, I'll be honest with you. If I didn't have that, I would slip just like that. And so I think you're right. One of the life hacks, maybe we should write a book together, Chris. And maybe the very first chapter, like, or the only chapter, like, should be a life hack is having people in your life, coaches and friends that know who you are, and that you don't have any secrets to those people, and that they're help, and you're allowing them and giving them permission to push you along.
Good call. I might just write that book this weekend, Chris.
That's right. Let's do it.
Yeah,
Let's do it.
that's
And
good
imagine
word
what your
on
life
that.
would be like. Imagine what your life would be like and what my life would be like. Our marriages would be like, our parenting, our businesses, if we didn't have the friendships and the coaching that we have. Like, I mean, we'd probably just do what a lot of people do.
Sure.
And, you know, kind of, I believe you're either going forward or you're going back. I don't believe that you're in a standstill position in life.
Yeah, I would agree. Things are moving, right? The
Yeah.
question is what direction am I headed? Is it
Yeah.
a direction that I'll be proud of someday at the end of the road when it's all said and done, or will I be a person full of regrets and bitter?
Yeah.
So, to recap, what I'm taking away from today, Chris, is number one, pay attention to my thoughts, in particular, limiting beliefs, things that I'm
Yep.
telling myself that could hold me back from my purpose or potential. Number two is who's in my boat? Who's my friends?
Absolutely.
Who am I hanging around? And then the one that we touched on before that you mentioned is going to be being intentional about personal growth and development. The books I'm reading, the maybe I'm missing a who, meaning a coach or some type of relationship with somebody that has more wisdom and expertise in an area than me. And the reason, when it comes to the health and nutrition, Chris, I'm glad that you pick up that I'm not critical on that, because that would just be number one, so counterproductive. I wouldn't be a good friend. And yet I'm a man on the journey too.
Right.
Yesterday, I just shared with my wife, we had a really good conversation. I talk to my wife on a regular basis. And then there's conversations where it's like, ooh, that was a really good conversation. That was yesterday for us. And I just called her. I was missing my dad a lot yesterday. I left Sam's Club and I was just sitting there and I missed my dad's voice. I was just missing him. And the reality of just like I can't pick up the phone and call him. And yet I called my wife and I shared that with her, which kind of opened up a deeper conversation around a few things. And I told her, I was like, babe, yeah, it was Aubrey's birthday. And so we got home around 9 o'clock. And I'm like, babe, I want you, if I'm, I hesitate to say this, so I'm going to say it because I don't want to, Chris.
Go ahead.
I said to her, we got home last night from Aubrey's baseball game, her birthday celebration. She wanted to play baseball with family and friends, so that's what we did.
I love it.
And I got home and I was just thinking about things. I was thinking about things that could cause me to feel anxiety because I start to think about the future in a negative way. I start to feel anxious. You know what I did, Chris? Right before bed, man. I ate an ice cream sandwich. I ate a melted ice cream sandwich. Now that is a brother in desperation eating out of the cooler of melted ice, a melted ice cream sandwich. And yet that's what I did. And I told my wife, I said, babe, it's important for me to someday when I'm old to be healthy. And there's a gap. Me eating the melted ice cream sandwich at 9 or 10 o'clock, like I couldn't have picked a worse thing to eat all the way around. And yet that's what I did. And I shared with her, like, here's who I strive to be. This is where I was at 24 hours ago. Chris, I wanted to bring her into that conversation because for me, I know my tendency, if I'm not being proactive, is to emotionally eat. I don't even like saying it, but to
Yep.
emotionally eat, meaning if it's a high, it's a celebration party,
I do the same
like
thing.
let's go. Or if I'm singing the blues, right, about something
Yep.
or thinking about something, I want to eat. I want to indulge. And so I brought my wife into the conversation just to let her know, like, hey, if you see me doing this, like here's probably what's going on. Ask me some questions. See
Mm,
if I'm doing okay. Right? Because the reason I bring up
great.
that whole story is because to me I have to be intentionally vulnerable, meaning I say what I don't want to say. And then I share that with others that I know care for me and pull them closer to me and ask for help. Most people are willing to help.
Yes. Yes. Well, and when you find people that know you and trust you, so one of the things I've learned to do in friendships, I used to trust everybody,
Hmm.
and what I learned is there's a difference between trust and entrust. So here's the way I describe it. Trust is I can trust you. I trust that 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 I mean, I can just trust you at face value, but trust is so trust is this is my heart, okay? And I'm going to show you my heart, okay? But I'm not going to give you my heart. Trust is when I entrust my heart to you, and you entrusted your heart to your wife last night, right? Like you handed your heart to your wife and you entrusted it to her. I don't entrust my life to very many people. I can trust, but I don't have to entrust. And so therefore, if they don't have my heart, if they're not holding my heart, they can't crush it.
Mm.
Okay. And so but I think we've got to have a few people in life that we entrust things to. I feel like I entrust things to you and you entrust things to me. And yet we've proven over a decade, like that we're going to be friends that are going to be faithful, that are going to be loyal, that are not going to stab you in the back, that like I always tell you, like, look, if you're broke down or you need something in the middle of the night, call me and I'll be
Right.
there. But I think it really goes back to, man, if you surveyed adults, most adults have acquaintances, but they don't have friends.
I think especially for us guys,
Oh, yeah.
I think there's some obvious key differences between men and women, and yet one of them, to me, it seems like just observation, is that women naturally talk more, and yet when it comes to guys, I think my tendency, if I'm not careful, is to isolate myself and pull back if I feel like things aren't as I desire and if I don't feel like I have it all together, right? I have a tendency to want to be right and look good all the time. And so if there's something going on, my tendency is to pull back. And yet I think for us guys, it's important that I'm not sure where I heard this, but I heard something like this, that a lot of guys die in silent isolation or
Yeah,
silent
they do.
frustration, where they start to recluse and pull back and just get lonely and depressed and defeated and discouraged. And so I think in particular for us guys, my point is that we actually need each other,
Yes.
right?
That where that
In a
comes from.
healthy way, meaning friendship with other guys that's open, transparent, healthy relationship. I think it's essential, and yet it doesn't happen by accident.
Yeah. Chris, think about where that comes from. When you're a little guy, you hear men don't talk. Men
Mm.
don't show their feelings. Men. So in other words, it goes back to my book. We hear all these lies and we start to believe them. You know what I mean? Like I've always heard my whole life, men don't ask for directions. You know what? I will freaking ask for a direction. Like you know what? You know why? Because time is of the essence. Time is the most valuable thing you have. So instead of driving around trying to find this address for 30 minutes to an hour because I'm stubborn and I heard men don't ask for direction, you know what I do? I ask for directions.
There we
Hey,
go.
where is this located at? And breaking down those lies, like, hey, we hear things like men don't build deep friendships, men aren't emotional, men aren't this, men aren't that. I just say be who God created you to be, you know. And the bigger story out of this book, Chris, which we haven't talked about and we're running out of time, but
Yep.
um, is I truly found my identity in who I
Mm.
am in Christ. And really, that's the most powerful thing, that I used to live like this. I was going to show everybody I was going to be the best pastor, the best dressed pastor. I was going to be a mega pastor. And then God began to deal with me over time. And now I live my life like this, that I'm a child of God who happens to be a husband and a father and a grandpa and a pastor, and a firefighter, real estate, chaplain, whatever. But none of these things define me. It's who I am. I am a child of God. And so how do I live as one of his children? And
It's
I
good.
didn't have a dad growing up. I never met my biological dad. My mom's been divorced 7 times, married 8. And I could play the victim, yet I chose to be the victor instead of the victim. And it has changed the whole trajectory of my life. And now I've changed the trajectory of my kids' lives because I chose to not be the victim in thinking, but the victor.
That's good. Chris, in reading your book, my thought was this would be a great book if somebody feels stuck in their
Yes.
life, in any area of their life, and they're looking to have a breakthrough. I love the simplicity of your books that somebody can grab it, take hold of it, and actually apply. This isn't a book about theory, and it's not
Right.
airy fairy. Like there's actually some tactical things that someone can do to have a breakthrough and start changing things around in their life as they change their thinking. Where do we go to find your book, Chris?
Yeah. If you go to quantumleapbook.net, so quantumleapbook.net,
Okay.
and you can pick up a copy there. And yeah, would
Thank
love
you,
to have you
Chris.
get it and read it.
Thanks, man.
Thank you.